set by the UN and African Union agenda, and adopted, of course, and signed by many governments, most nations have not yet met their goals in ensuring universal access of water for all. Millions of people still lack of access to water and proper sanitation system. Over the decades, the situation has grown worse, and the numbers of people experiencing water shortages has increased dramatically. As Namibia is a semi-arid country, it demands integrated resource management, innovative solutions, and effective resource management. These are not merely an academic target or exercise, it is imperative for safeguarding the future. Namibia's water resources are undeniably very precious. To face significant challenges due to our arid climate and limited availability. Therefore, there's an urgent need to creative solutions tailored especially for our local context. And there's another problem or issue, which is climate change. It's impacting all of us. Climate change causing prolonged droughts and threats to agriculture and simply individual households. Rural water supply poses significant challenges requiring costly infrastructure investment and long-term planning to ensure resilience to constraints like drought we witness in many areas and neighboring countries, as just recently, I think Zambia and Zimbabwe, they all have big problems with water currently. And hence proper management of scarce resources and awareness from childhood. I think we also have representative here from the education sector. Onwards stands as a cornerstone in our efforts to manage water sustainability. The transportation, production of food, the abstraction, pumping, and treatment of water and wastewater, also to mention, have to be taken into consideration as well, as the need of these essential resources are rising, also given by development and by demographic development. In light of these challenges, the emerge of green hydrogen project offers promise as a sustainable solution to address Namibia's pressing needs in terms of development and employment. But this will only succeed and be able to be established, the new industry, green hydrogen, if we manage to balance water, electricity, and food security at the same time. And also to mention not just green hydrogen, because it's in everybody's ear currently, but also the tourism sector needs a security in these three pillars, and also the mining sector especially. So effective monitoring is vital for the success of water projects, ensuring accurate measurement of usage and sustainable provision. Continuous maintenance to prevent leaks, minimize water loss, and ensure equitable distribution. Yeah, we often see when it's rain especially that there's a burst of pipeline here in Windhoek. This is also a large misuse or water that has not been used, or we just lose this water. This is also an issue which is around maintenance, I think very important to mention. And of course, strategic action plans based on diagnostic assessment and policies are key in this regard. So water awareness, demand management, and community participation are crucial for balanced water use and water security. And I think we do have also representative from the civil society today, and hope they will come into also in our discussion later on. So capacity building, institutional development, implementing modern technology play pivotal roles in implementing integrated water resource management. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also allow to address some thoughts on food security. According to the Food Agriculture Organization, Namibia has been classified as a country with severe food insecurity. In the latest report, it stated and estimated that around 700,000 people currently face acute food insecurity. I still can't imagine this number. I mean, we are just about 3 million, no? And you can just count yourself how the percentage of those who are facing food insecurity is unbelievable. And also knowing that Namibia is an upper middle income country, we have this huge number of food insecurity. And and this figure tends to rise as we have key factors like price shocks, inflation, yesterday just the increase of fuel prices. This will also have an impact on the food security as well. So and given the problems of climate change in terms of prolonged dry periods and less rain also have a negative impact on food security. So this phenomenon is reality, as we just encountered these months, and less seasonal rain as than anticipated was below average, and the erratic distribution of rainfall in the country is a major problem. So collaboration with stakeholders, ministries, and experts will hopefully ensure a holistic approach to water, food, and electricity security. The development of green economy is essential for sustainable growth with investments in renewable energy, reducing also the carbon footprint. Additionally, robust infrastructure with the latest technology is a key and crucial in this regard. As we are in the age of artificial intelligence, a lot can be done. I think there's still a lot of potential that we can take into projects and consider. So adequate infrastructure ensures access to clean water, sanitation, reliable energy, and food supply. Moreover, incentives for water-saving technologies and renewable energy projects will provoke solutions and encourage sustainable development, furthermore supporting socio-economic development and resilience to climate change. And also the aspect of mismanagement for essential resources and within institutions will undermine sustainable goals. Ladies and gentlemen, job creation is crucial in Namibia, as we have about 50% among the youth without jobs. Strengthening the water, energy, food nexus can provide much needed employment in this country. Investing in irrigation projects, desalination projects, and large-scale infrastructure not only enhance food security and water access, but also can generate long-term employment that's so much needed in this country, especially in the rural areas. By leveraging natural resources and expanding local energy accessibility, and I would also like to say affordability, Namibia can foster sustainable development and provide a secure future for the youth. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the authors for their invaluable contribution to our understanding of the water, energy, food nexus in Namibia, ensuring social equity, economic efficiency, and environmental sustainability for generations to come. May their work serve as a catalyst for meaningful dialogue, collaboration, and action as we strive towards a more sustainable, prosperous future for all of us. I thank you very much, and I wish all of us a beautiful lunch and good discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Russmann. That was indeed quite a mouthful for what lays ahead still in Namibia when we think about water, energy, food security, and sustainable development within our nation. So, key themes we hope to highlight, as Mrs. Russmann has already mentioned in this publication that's launched today, not necessarily pertained within the publication, but that we would like our stakeholders to hopefully also take into consideration is the critical role of effective monitoring already mentioned, demand management also mentioned, community engagement, and we feel that within our country the stakeholders that are working within water, energy, food definitely are on the right path when it comes to already having the strategic plans in place, and the policies are there. It's just a matter of implementation. So let me not rather take up much time. I would like to now officially hand over to our authors, and I would just quickly like to introduce them briefly so that you know who they are. Unfortunately, Mr. Piet Haynes is unable to join us in person today, although Detlof van Oortzen, Dr. van Oortzen, will be reading his statement. The author's statements, for the sake of the media, can be obtained after the event today from myself. Dr. Detlof van Oortzen, thank you for being here today and for your extensive contributions since we started the book discussions. He's the director of VO Consulting, and he brings decades of experience in high-energy nuclear physics, acquired through his PhD studies at the University of Cape Town. His expertise offers innovative perspectives on the water, energy, food nexus. Dr. van Oortzen has also collaborated with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung over the numerous years to render key insights and expertise, including a variety of publications such as the Issues, Challenges and Opportunities to Develop Green Hydrogen in Namibia, published in 2021, The State of Namibia's Electricity Sector, published in 2019, Smart Grids and Their Potential in Namibia's Electricity Sector in 2016, and in 2015, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, Powering Namibia. Since the early 1990s, Dr. van Oortzen has been active in the Namibian energy sector, conceptualizing and implementing numerous energy-related studies and projects. He's also served on various international and national multidisciplinary specialist teams, conducting viability assessments, specialist studies, and policy development. He's a member of several energy and radiation protection expert groups and serves on the Namibia Power Corporation Board of Directors since 2017. Now, Dr. Martin Schneider, I'm proud to announce, is currently he's a registered professional natural scientist. He's part of civil society, which is also something very dear to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And he's executive director of the Desert Research Foundation of Namibia. He studied geosciences, obtained his PhD in geography from the Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main in 1990. He joined the Department of Agriculture in 1984, where he worked as an agricultural training and extension advisor. Thereafter, from 1990 to 1995, he served as a country director for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in Namibia. Between 1999 and 2011, Dr. Martin Schneider has served in the newly established Faculty of Agriculture and Natural Resources of the University of Namibia, and he's served as a deputy and executive dean. He's also published numerous scientific papers relating to agriculture, water, land type surveying, and environmental development in Namibia. Now, to complete the trio, I believe that Dr. van Oortzen will also briefly introduce Mr. Piet Haynes. Unfortunately, as I've mentioned, he's not able to join us today. But he's a seasoned civil engineer and a respected water management consultant. He holds degrees in science and water engineering from the University of Stellenbosch. His extensive experience includes the role as a chairperson of the SADC Water Sector Technical Committee, and he's also the commissioner of 5 water commissions established between Namibia and the neighboring river basin states. And he's also added invaluable credibility to the discussions on sustainable water management. He's contributed to numerous papers and books about water resource management and other water-related matters, and was honored as a fellow of the South African Institution of Civil Engineering. Before he retired in 2007, Piet's career at the Department of Water Affairs in Namibia since 1976 has progressed through the ranks in the divisions of planning and operations, where lastly Mr. Piet Haynes served as the Director of Investigations and Research, heading the divisions of hydrology, geohydrology, planning and water law administration. So gentlemen, quite a handful and a mouthful and decades of experience that is contained within this publication. I hope that you will find very exciting, and I will now open the floor officially to you. Thank you.
Some adjustment is sometimes needed. Director of Ceremonies, please forgive me for that joke in the beginning. Fellow countrymen and countrywomen, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Detlof von Oertzen, and I will speak on behalf of myself and Piet Haynes. It is great to see so many people here at the launch of this very important book, which covers a topic that I consider most urgent and important for Namibia. Not because we are stepping into a drought season again, not because we already know that 700,000 people rely on food aid, not because we are weak in implementation in Namibia in terms of capital projects, but because the topic of water, energy, food is such an overarching topic for us all. And so this is the very basis on which this book is grounded. But before I go into the details, allow me to thank some individuals and organizations who made it possible for the authors to actually compile this book on this matter that is so important to us. First and foremost, of course, it is Nathalie Russmann, resident representative of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Mrs. Russmann, thank you very much for your support in making it possible. We already have a long track record of good collaboration on books and speaking opportunities, etc. And without this support, many projects would not have been possible. So our heartfelt thanks from the side of the authors to again make it possible to have the printing done in a way that is appealing, to have the layout done properly, to have language editing and all these other things. Colleagues, there's always a person behind the scene who is the doer and the coordinator. And in this role, Claudia Gosso, who you have just met, was the person to do it on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Claudia, thank you very much for your inputs. We have had multiple emails, far too many in my opinion, but hopefully the output does in fact say this was worth our time. Thank you very much for your support, for all the arrangements, etc. We have Dr. Sandy Fitchett, who did the language edit. We have Maike Becker from Lund Media for the layout work. And we have a number of individuals who contributed, both in terms of pictures, information, feedback, etc. I just want to mention a handful: Dr. Gunhild von Oertzen, Dr. Gabi Schneider, Mrs. Sanay Prinsloo, Mr. Bertram Swartz, Mr. Rainer Ritter, Mr. Pedro Moritz. Thank you for sharing your insights, and thank you for making it possible that we could tap into your common understanding of what Namibia needs and what our requirements are. So I will now say a few words as an introduction to the book. The book is titled Namibia's Water, Energy, Food Nexus, National Development in Uncertain Times. So when we speak about a water, energy, food nexus, ladies and gentlemen, we refer to this interrelationship and the connection between water, energy, and food. And by calling it a nexus, this indicates that water, energy, and food are in fact mutually dependent, and they rely on the availability of these different nexus pillars. This relationship implies that it is very difficult to manage water, energy, and food by just looking at one of these pillars, by having just one view on, say, enhancing water security or enhancing energy security. But we need to look globally at how these three types of nexus elements are interconnected. Now, I just want to illustrate why we are saying that they are so interconnected. We must bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that water is, of course, essential for food production, and my colleague Martin Schneider will speak about this. And water is also essential in the energy industry, specifically in the hydroelectric, for hydroelectricity. On the other hand, energy is also essential, of course, for extracting, for treating, distributing, and supplying water. So there is no pipe with water without energy before it. And processing wastewater, we have heard about the sanitation issue, and of course then lastly, to produce food. And producing adequate and affordable food, ladies and gentlemen, depends therefore on the availability, the adequacy, and the affordability of both energy and water. So it is these three elements, the availability, the adequacy, but also the affordability, which in Namibia plays such an important role. Ladies and gentlemen, the title in fact also indicates that we refer to national development in uncertain times. And Mrs. Rusman has already made reference to the advent of climate change. I will make reference to this as well, but let me speak about something else first. And so we have deliberately included this second part of the title because we need to illustrate, or we wanted to illustrate the gravity and the challenges that we are really facing. The gravity is that we live in a finite environment, the Earth. We are, a group of humans of, some 8 billion in total. In Namibia, just a tad more than 3 million. If we think back in the history of our country just 120 years ago, the early settlers estimated that we had about 200,000 people some 120 years ago, and today we are 3 million. So this is a 15-fold increase in population size. So where there was one person 120 years ago, we now have 15 persons sharing the same set of resources: land, water, and all what comes with it. So evidently, population growth, ladies and gentlemen, implies that the demand for water, for energy and food must rapidly expand to in fact make sure that all these people have something to do, to eat, and to sustain themselves. This is especially so because our standards of living are also increasing. Some of us at least have the privilege of actually experiencing a rising standard of living. This is certainly not a Namibian-wide privilege that we have, but some of us are privileged to have seen this or witnessed this from our grandparents to our parents to ourselves. And that, of course, means that we are now consuming more resources to cover our insatiable appetite for water, for energy, for food. And so that, of course, is an extremely important driver of the resources and the use of resources that we have. We must also bear in mind that, living on a finite planet, we have planetary boundaries and we have national boundaries, not these political ones, but we have national carrying capacities that are at some stage maxed out. We have a finite amount of water to go around, a finite number of hectares to do agriculture on, and therefore we do not have the privilege of having umpteen planets to use for our benefit. So we must learn to live within this one planet, and in Namibia we must, if at all possible, learn to live within the ecosystem services that are provided and within their limitations. Now I come to the topic that Mrs. Rusman has already alluded to, and that is the advent that we are all experiencing as humans and in the animal kingdom, of course, as well, and that is the changing climate. Now, a changing climate introduces new stressors, particularly in the water sector, and then by implication also the water, the energy sector, and of course the food sector, no doubt. And so it is extremely important that we recognize that the adequacy of how we manage water, energy, and food determines whether the security of supplies can be met today, and we will be able to have this security of supply for water, energy, and food for generations to come. And this is by no means a given. Security of supply is a luxury, and we have to make it happen, otherwise future generations will not live in this comfortable world. Namibia faces a multitude of development challenges. There's no doubt about that. Primary amongst those are those related to the very existence of people, relating to water, relating to energy, and relating to food. And so if we are addressing water, energy, and food as a combined unit, then we can also, on top of that strong foundation, we can have national development ambitions realized. But to have national development ambitions that are possibly a little bit too ambitious without in fact ensuring that we have covered the basis is of course a rather risky strategy. I will speak about this a little bit later, but it is important that the interrelationship between water, energy, food is recognized and must be addressed. So we have therefore decided we will provide a status quo assessment of the water sector, the food sector, and the energy sector. And we will then explore how Namibia could go about, in fact, in strengthening these different type of sectors and highlighting the interrelationship and the possibilities in these sectors. I will therefore go to the first part of the book, which is the section on water, which was written by Piet Haynes. Now, as Claudia has made reference to, Piet is not here today, unfortunately, but he has in fact made available a statement which I will now read on his behalf. And so the sentences I will now make reference to are from Piet. If you are joining us online, Piet, be greeted. It is lovely to have you, and thank you for participating in the compilation of this book. So now to Piet's words. I've been requested by Dr. van Oortzen to be a co-author of the book and to elaborate the importance of the water sector in the interactions between water, energy, and food in Namibia. The climate in Namibia is driven by the sun, which provides the energy that produces the weather system rather, over the country. So most parts of the country have a rainy season in summer and brings rainfall. Some rainy seasons are not that successful, as we are witnessing right now. And this rainfall is a prerequisite to sustain life. Water on land is required for the natural vegetation to grow and to enable activities to produce both food and water. The components of the water, energy, food nexus are like a team with players that must support each other to win a match. But there needs to be a coach to develop the strategy and to instruct the different team players to do what they best do and to allow them to do it while making sure that we are all working on a common goal. And so the purpose of this book is really to describe the contribution that each of the three elements, the water, energy, food nexus elements have, and to suggest how this interaction is best managed to achieve the objective of sustaining life and enabling socio-economic development in Namibia. So Piet now goes into the details of some numbers related to the water sector, and he says the following provides some information about the water situation in Namibia. And it is very important that we are not scared about these numbers, but it is still important that we quantify what we are having and what we need to have. So Piet says the availability of water for man, beast, vegetation, and socio-economic development is determined by the average mean annual rainfall And on average, that average mean rainfall is only 250 millimeters per year. This rainfall is unevenly distributed over the land and varies between 0 along the coastal areas up to 700 millimeters per annum in the Zambezi region. Rainwater is then exposed to very high evaporation rates, varying between 3,700 millimeters per annum in the Karas region, so in the south, and some 2,600 millimeters in the Zambezi region. The huge difference between rainfall on the one hand, so average 250 millimeters per annum, and between evaporation, in other words, a few thousand millimeters per annum, that huge difference is the reason why Namibia is the most arid country in southern Africa. In fact, it is estimated that some 80% of the rain evaporates, so it falls and it evaporates, 15% is used by vegetation, 2% becomes runoff in ephemeral rivers, and only 1% ends up in groundwater and recharges the groundwater that many Namibians are depending on. Now, in the historical past of the country, the natural availability of water in Namibia's interior was limited by how low the rainfall was. So access to water was mainly from perennial springs and hand-dug wells in ephemeral rivers. And as a result, the development of the country, the cultivation of crops and stock farming and so, was very significantly limited by having access to these few spotty places where water was indeed accessible. Now, with the population development and the increase of the population, more water was urgently required in areas in the interior, especially where there was no open water source to be found, but where good grazing was available, and possibly for crop farming or even for stock farming and so. So this is where in the German colonial period there was a program started to drill boreholes, and these boreholes to a significant degree unlocked underground water resources for land use, and so have opened up in the meantime large tracts of lands that have previously been inaccessible because there was no free water. And so today stock farming and food production is possible in many parts of the country, even though not on the in the extensive scale that we are witnessing in many other countries. So upon South Africa's administration of the then territory of Southwest Africa, a so-called irrigation department, which was later known as the Department of Water Affairs, was created, and they determined the potential of the water and the requirements for water infrastructure. And so it is very important to understand that we have built on this legacy of understanding water resources and building water resources, fully cognizant that water is a very scarce resource in Namibia. Now, Namibia's water resources are grouped into the perennial sources. They are those rivers on our borders. They are grouped into the ephemeral rivers, which are mostly dry rivers that we know so well from the interior of Namibia, groundwater aquifers, etc., that are accessible by means of boreholes, but also these so-called unconventional sources, such as water desalination, the use of and reuse of surface water, and the use of and recycling of wastewater. And the recycling of wastewater, these activities are actually quite innovative, and Namibia was one of the first countries to actively reclaim sewage water and lead it back into the active water cycle for public consumption. And so now, I make a quick break because this is not what was said by Piet, but I just want to point out that, I was born in Windhoek and I grew up on reused water, and you can see what beautiful bodies it actually built. So, a lot can be done with the sewage water, so we should not shy away from it. So I now return to what Piet is saying. The others can be disregarded and is not for note-taking purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, the perennial rivers that run along the northern and southern borders of Namibia are, of course, the Kunene, the Okavango, Orange, and Zambezi rivers. It is important to note that the headwaters or the origins of these perennial rivers are all in foreign lands, in upstream countries. And so, although Namibia makes no contribution to these rivers, except in the case of the Orange River, where the Fish River actually contributes to the Orange River occasionally, if the Fish River actually has water, Namibia is still entitled to a share of these perennial rivers. And that is because we are a member of the so-called basin states. The fair and reasonable access to water that Namibia may claim from these perennial rivers is governed by international water law and must be renegotiated or negotiated between basin states. The potential availability of water from these rivers amounts to some 70,000 million cubic meters per annum. So this is not a printing mistake. This is all the water contained in the perennials on our borders, 70,000 million cubic meters per year, of which Namibia only uses 300 million cubic meters per year. So it's a fraction of the 70,000 million cubic meters. So there is plenty where the perennials are, but we are just a member of the basin states and can, of course, not lay claim to the entire water. In contrast, ladies and gentlemen, the ephemeral rivers, so these are the dry rivers in our inland, in Namibia's interior have an estimated 95% assured safe yield of some 220 million cubic meters per year. So in addition to the safe yield for groundwater from aquifers that we know, groundwater we have an assured yield of around 300 million cubic meters. So 220 from the ephemeral rivers and 300 million cubes is 520 million cubic meters per annum. And one would think, well, this is quite a lot. But what is very important is that we would, of course, with this resource of 520 million cubic meters, if we gauge it or benchmark it against the Global Water Stress Index, suggested by Professor Falkenmark from Sweden, then a country that is having an availability of less than 500 cubic meters per person per year is considered a nation that is stressed. So 500 is the threshold below which we consider water stress to occur. And for Namibia, that number is not 500 cubic meters per person per annum, but it is 175 only. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are suffering absolute water stress, and that is, of course, therefore emphasizing again that water is this incredibly important item that we must treat with care, with great care. So Piet further says the availability of water is therefore crucial to sustain the water, energy, and food nexus in Namibia. It underlines the importance to plan, establish, and operate the necessary infrastructure to make water resources available for use. And master water plans for Namibia have been conceived and have been adopted for the last 50 years or so, and have been modified a number of times. And they remain relevant to take care of new developments that we have, but planning is the essence and implementation is extremely important. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, I will not read all the key steps that Piet is suggesting in terms of infrastructure supply elements, because they are also described in detail in the book, except to say we must basically use all the different resources that we have, including the conventional sources from the ephemeral rivers, the conventional resources from the perennials, and also the full spectrum of unconventional water supply methods, including desalination, including water demand management, and so forth. So Pete then concludes and says, water is scarce in Namibia. It takes time to develop large water projects that must be implemented to meet future water demand, and it necessitates considerable financial resources to do so. This aspect remains of critical importance to further strengthen Namibia's food and electricity production and contribute to the country's socio-economic development in future. Ladies and gentlemen, and that is where Pete's statement ends, which was around the water sector. I will now continue and jump into the energy sector. And I would like to say a few words, starting with a rather thought-provoking notion from the former President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, who stated, "A nation that cannot control its energy resources cannot control its future." So there is little that I can add to this rather profound insight, as it so succinctly expresses that energy is an integral requirement of each and every economy. And therefore the provision of water and food and health services and, IT and, all the other things that we need to have for our day-to-day life depends on the availability, accessibility, and affordability, and the adequacy of a country's energy sector and the country's energy supplies. It is therefore of utmost importance to reflect on how we are to provide adequate energy that is available, that is accessible, and affordable to the people of Namibia. I emphasize affordable, accessible, and available to the people of Namibia, not as an export nation of our energy products, but for own use as well. So securing national energy supplies necessitates a thorough understanding of the options, costs, and impediments associated with individual energy supplies. And we have in the recent past witnessed a number of exciting discoveries, particularly in the oil and gas sector. And we have witnessed some hyper-pronouncements on green hydrogen and green ammonia and how it will reignite the country's stagnant economy. Whatever the future is and whichever the form will take, it is of critical importance that we can meet our energy needs, and it should not be now, but we should also pave the way for future generations to be able to meet their needs. Now, Namibia is generally and generously endowed with a variety of energy sources. There's no doubt about it specifically, and I want to make reference to the country's renewable energy riches, specifically solar, wind, and biomass resources, bush biomass. And we also have a number of non-renewable deposits, specifically fossil fuels that are discovered at the moment in natural gas, as well as minerals used in the international nuclear energy industry. What we need to recognize is that Namibia's renewable energy resources, ladies and gentlemen, they are abundant, they are readily available, they are safe, they are clean, and they will remain so in future. These are our resources. In contrast, the non-renewable energy resources are finite. That's why they are called non-renewable. And we are also aware that some of the non-renewable resources, of course, have severe impacts on our environment and therefore also on socio-economic development. Now, the deliberate exploitation of Namibia's mineral and fossil resources will boost national development, no doubt about this. However, it is important that we have some realism about this, as conceptual misinterpretations today can cost us dearly. And if I say can cost us, it means us tax-paying Namibians, we could end up paying for stuff that is not for our benefit. And so a sober perspective on our energy sources and their applications is therefore absolutely essential. Now, today, ladies and gentlemen, Namibia remains fully dependent on water, but that's not what is being written here. Namibia remains fully dependent on the import of all liquid fuels. So all of you have come with a petrol or diesel-powered car. You have, in fact, yes, I know, Mr. Rödern, you came with an electric vehicle, and you have probably recharged it at home. That's one step into the future. I should also mention that all coal, all liquid petroleum gas are imported. We also still, after 34 years of independence, we still import a very sizable portion of our electricity requirements. You know, this is something that is as a member or previous member of the board of NamPower, this is something that I find almost depressing. And I'm looking at Professor Dupisani. This is something that worries me, that after 34 years of independence, we still rely so much on these electricity imports while we could do it at home. Historically, ladies and gentlemen, technical advances have made available energy in vast quantities. They are accessible and they are relatively cheap. If I compare when I buy a 1 liter bottle of water today at a petrol station, it costs more than a liter of petrol, which is shipped around the world, etc. So this is just an expression how cheap this energy is actually delivered. So the abundance of fossil fuels in particular have enabled urbanization on a vast scale, have enabled agricultural outputs and productivity, and they have also enhanced our personal choices. In terms of mobility, Mr. Rödern's electric vehicle, and in terms of the other travel modes and entertainment that we use that consumes energy. So I think it is also fair to say that the consumption of fossil fuels has also markedly contributed to lift many people out of poverty, simply because this energy was accessible and was available. But they have also, and we should not forget, fossil fuels have also widened the gap between industrialized nations and between developing nations, because it was industrial nations who had access to these or made them available. So our appetite and our consumption of fossil fuels is a key contributor today to human-induced global climate change and the various negative environmental repercussions that we are witnessing today. If we are to avoid uncontrollable global temperature increases, we must over time phase out fossil fuels, and this is probably long before they are depleted. So there is a global energy transition in place. It is in some countries quicker than in other countries, and that necessitates that fossil fuels need to eventually be replaced by sources that do not degrade the environment, and there is an urgent and important effort underway that this global change is accelerated, and it will not stop before it reaches Namibia. Namibia is right in it, and we must decide whether we embrace this transition or whether we will just be sidelined as we have in many of the past development endeavors. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now conclude. I think it is very important, and the book gives much more meat. I've basically sketched some bones here, but the meat will give evidence that Namibia's energy riches must be effectively and rapidly developed. Now, if I speak about Namibia's energy riches, it does not refer just to one type of energy. I'm saying making a global statement about our energy riches need to be exploited, developed, and brought to fruition. Our efforts in developing our energy options must at the same time strengthen and must be done in a way that strengthens the water, energy, food nexus. In the energy sector in particular, it is very important that we do not follow a single track. I'm worried when we hear about single track solutions that will then just miraculously leverage Namibia out of misery. It does not. We need a multi-pronged approach that creates a diverse development growth centers where jobs are the primary objective, something that initiatives that expand the economy, improve livelihood, our resilience to external shocks such as climate change. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, Namibia would benefit if we actively partook in the global clean energy transition, including by strengthening our status as a net energy exporter, which we still are. Even though we import most of our energies, we are still a net energy exporter because of our uranium exports. And we also have this other very special status that we are a net carbon sink. So we are not the ones that are putting carbon in the atmosphere. We are actually absorbing more carbon than we are producing. These two statuses, a net energy exporter and net carbon sink, are worth money, development capital. And we have it, and we should, in fact, build on these critical ingredients. If we do, then in this way, Namibia's adaptive capacities and the resilience would be improved. So that is the resilience to external shocks, which are critical prerequisites for national development to take place in uncertain times, in periods where we do not know exactly how the future will look like. I conclude with a statement by Barack Obama again, who stated, "A nation that cannot control its energy resources cannot control its future." Ladies and gentlemen, it is time that Namibia started to control its energy resources. Thank you very much. I will now ask Martin, Dr. Martin Schneider, to actually make a few statements on food and to then conclude the exposition on the book. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Detlef. Do you want to take this in? Detlef?
I do not know whether this... let me take it.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, Detlef. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I'd like to share some comments about the food sector with you. With the question, how do we ensure that our population of 3 million have enough food to survive? This is indeed a challenging subject. Food production in Namibia is diverse. We are producing food in all 14 regions, from the Zambezi region to Oranje and from the Kunene region to the far south of the country in Karasburg and Gibeon in the Karas region. We are producing and marketing food in the informal sector as well as in the formal sector. We are selling a wide range of food products to wholesalers and are exporting food and beverages beyond our borders. Food production takes place in conservancies, in rural settlements, as well as in urban areas, on farms and small holdings to secure food for own households and businesses, as well as additional income by selling fresh produce and meat to customers wherever possible. Such examples include small holdings close to Windhoek, Swakopmund, Maruru, and Okahandja. And as has been noted, Namibia is not blessed with water, and the lack and sufficient rain and periods of drought remain persisting threats to food production. Utilizing water for irrigation farming remains important, and it is interesting to note that since independence, over 30 years ago, we succeeded to increase our overall areas under irrigation considerably. At independence, approximately 5,000 hectares land was under irrigation, whereas approximately 15,000 hectares are being irrigated to date to ensure a large variety of crops being produced for local and export markets. Of course, we are utilizing our permanent running rivers, as mentioned, the Orange, the Zambezi, and the Okavango and Kunene, but are also irrigating by using water stored in reservoirs, dams, as well as relying on sufficient groundwater, boreholes, aquifer, and natural springs. In addition, food production also depends on dryland farming, relying, of course, on sufficient rain at the right time. Major irrigation operations are the government-run green schemes, the Hadap and Stampriet areas, the Orange River project at Ausenkær and Noordoever, and at the Nate Dam. In addition, there are operations in the Maize Triangle and in the Omaheke and Zambezi regions. We are producing grapes, dates, and blueberries for export markets. Of late, even trials with bananas have started. At Kalimbeza, in the Zambezi region, we have been producing so-called jumbo rice for more than 30 years. Yet none of this rice has found its way to the shelves in our capital. Government's intention is to increase areas for irrigation, which is possible, but will require sufficient resources and careful planning. Namibia's largest dam, the Neckartal Dam, was completed in 2018. The initial intention by government was to have 5,000 hectares under irrigation. This figure was later reduced to 2,000 hectares. To date, no irrigation project has been established at Neckartal Dam, and sadly, water continues to evaporate from this large water resource. Apart from irrigation, Namibia remains a major meat producer, as well as being able to harvest substantial fish resources from the Benguela Current, where we also produce large amounts of salt. Meat and fish generate substantial earnings through export sales, which are very important and need to be carefully maintained by always ensuring hygiene standards. Having mentioned all the operations taking place countrywide, the question still remains whether there is enough food for everybody. Severe acute malnutrition, poverty, and inequality amongst vulnerable groups remain problematic. Rural communities rely on supplementary food parcels, assistance from government, donor organizations, and civil society organizations to prevent loss of lives amongst our society. This is unacceptable and should not be the case. Although Namibia does not produce enough food for its own needs, some 24% of all food grown per year is lost or wasted at farm level. Eliminating or minimizing food loss and waste along the entire value chain, from producer to customer, provides opportunities to further enhance food supplies in Namibia. Import and export of agricultural products play an important role in Namibia. While up to 77% of the value produced in the agriculture sector is exported and contributes significantly to the country's national trade balance, only 43% of the food consumed in Namibia is produced locally. At the same time, several initiatives have been launched to strengthen local food production capacity. These include government schemes such as the Horticultural Market Share Promotion Scheme, aimed at increasing the local sourcing of food, and the National Horticulture Development Initiative, aimed at opening local markets for locally produced horticulture commodities, as you may have seen in your supermarkets around the country. Long-standing challenges such as the shortage of suitable land, the lack of water, skills shortages, and we were talking about education earlier, and inadequate financial and technical resources to strengthen the subsisting farming sector remain food-related bottlenecks that negatively affect the food industry's sustainability. Stock theft and poaching are an ever-increasing problem. They constitute a major contributing factor to the decline of cattle farming in Namibia. Livestock and game farmers have lost millions worth of animals to predation and theft, which continue to be persistent issues. The lack of proper law enforcement and the implementation of sufficient penalization of poaching are burning issues. Over the past few decades, enormous losses of public funds for projects that never reached operational status and remained dormant to date underline the need for a fundamental change of priorities. Examples are the commencement of the agriculture production at the Neckartal Dam, business parks, fresh produce distribution hubs, and the Oshakati abattoir and tannery. Potential development options that can strengthen the country's water, energy, and food nexus can include, and I'm just mentioning a few examples, there are many mentioned in our book, establishing, for instance, horticulture production at Betani in the Karas region. We also identified introducing irrigation projects in the greater Kuvla area, increasing irrigation farming in the Stumpred area, and creating so-called water, energy, food corridors to spur decentralized development. And that's important. We have to think about the decentralization of development. Such industrial development corridors could be created across Namibia. Of strategic importance would be the coast-to-capital corridor, as it would unlock the unlimited water supplies of the Atlantic Ocean to produce potable water using seawater desalination powered by renewable energy, as Detlof has mentioned. Such water would be pumped via Usakos, Karibib, Okahanja to the Von Bach Dam to complement Windhoek's other water supplies. Usakos, Karibib, Omaruru, Wilhelmsthal, and Okahanja would be immediate beneficiaries and could be developed to become so-called climate-smart villages, further strengthening already established food production industries. Other industrial development corridors may be possible too, for example, the Okavango Central Corridor. An Okavango North Corridor would pipe water from the Okavango River to the densely populated towns of Oshakati and Ndangwa and beyond. Another possibility is a Harap Central Corridor linking the Harap Dam to Windhoek's water supply system and possibly connecting the Neckartal Dam to the Harap Dam. Piping water for hundreds of kilometers is costly, of course, but unavoidable as our cities and towns cannot provide for their own water needs. Investments in large-scale infrastructure projects, as is necessary to realize one or several industrial development corridors, will create numerous permanent jobs and invigorate the immediate local and regional economy. Namibia's journey towards robust and resilient food production revolves around a dynamic interplay of factors. And they have been mentioned already, such as climate, technology, policies, funding, and community engagement. Thus, the nation's commitment to achieving food security, sustainability, and improved nutrition, which are essential for the well-being of its citizens, requires realism and which are essential for the well-being of its citizens. Such an approach is needed not only to address current challenges, develop opportunities, and integrate local wisdom with global expertise, but also to develop a more resilient, thriving, and vibrant national food production system. Where do we go from here? You may ask. And the Sustainable Development Goals were mentioned. Number 2 is mentioned as zero hunger. If you will look at the book, you will find some answers, not all, but maybe some. And I want to conclude also with a quote from an American agriculturalist, Norman Borlaug, maybe provoking as well. You can't build a peaceful world on empty stomachs and human misery. And believe you me, I have seen it in Namibia. Thank you very much.
Indeed, a very true statement. Thank you very much, Dr. Martin Schneider. Thank you very much, Dr. von Oeltzen, for the insightful dissection of this insightful book, in fact. We believe that this publication is going to benefit our multi-sector stakeholders in the country holistically going forward to take action and take the right steps in securing food, water and energy for our country, and with that also to create further job opportunities. Keywords that come out of this book launch today that we would like for you to take home is innovation is key. And taking the step to the next level for the youth of Namibia, especially with the assistance of tertiary institutions, with the assistance of the key ministries and our experts that our country represents. Thank you very much for this book. We are very, very happy that today we can officially launch this book. And we would like to, before we conclude the launch today, give our audience an opportunity to ask questions, provide inputs, give critical remarks. We would like to also ask that for the next 40 or so minutes that we are going to take one question or two questions at a time, preferably one, and then hand over to the authors for a brief feedback. So we're going to be handing around some roving mics and give you an opportunity to ask questions, make comments. Whereafter we will then move on to the closing of the launch today. Before we hand over to the audience and open the floor for your insights, we would also just like to remind that digitalization is here. We have not printed so many books this year because we feel that we need to preserve also in terms of taking advantage of the digitization age. And so we have included a QR code in the beginning of the book on the front page that you can then scan in, or even for your loved ones or stakeholders that you will be taking the publication to that are asking for a copy, to scan in that code so that you can go and download the PDF copy from our website and hopefully at a later stage also on the VO Consulting website as well. So thank you very much for your patience so far. I will now officially hand over to you for your remarks. As mentioned, we will take one comment at a time if it is a question, so that we can hand over to the authors to give answers. What we are not able to cover today, there are feedback forms on your seating places that you can complete, and we will take note of your comments, questions, feedback for further recommendation to key stakeholders that might also not be represented here today at this platform. Thank you.
Konrad Rödern, formerly from Solar Age, Namibia. Thank you for Mrs. Russmann, and thank you for Detloff for mentioning growth in a limited planet. Mrs. Russmann mentioned the figure of 3 million, which came out, 3 million Namibians, which came out with the last census. Why haven't the two of you, and I address now Detloff for an answer, mentioned for me the most important figure, and this is 3% population growth. Talking a bit cynically, we could say we don't have a job problem, we don't have a water problem. When I came to Namibia, Namibia had 1.35 million people. Now we have 3 million people, and 3% population growth in my calculation means every year until that figure changes, 90,000 more Namibians per year, which need water, food, energy, but also education, schooling, a share of policing, a share of the judiciary system, etc. Have you worked this figure into your book? That is my question.
Claudia, can I just speak as I... Yes, please. Thank you, Konrad. That is certainly a very valid remark. And yes, we have tried to speak about the importance of population and how population then drives demand for services, demand for water, for food, etc. We have specifically made reference to the absolute population number and not the population growth rate. So for a person like myself, a growth rate is an abstract figure and is very important, but it is actually the absolute number of people who consume, not the growth rate. So we make reference to the actual active mouths that are to be fed today and in future, and we make statements on that. But you are perfectly right, and it is certainly something that goes far beyond the water, energy, food sector, and that is that if we continue to grow our population at 3+% per year, and if we look at the rather stagnant growth of jobs and opportunities in Namibia, we are going to face severe problems just from people not being accommodated anywhere, not finding a role to play. And so this is something that I worry a lot about. And so we try to address it in terms of the water, energy, food nexus complex. And we have the privilege not to go into the education aspects, into the job creation aspects, even though they are extremely important. So I would hope that this debate about how and what we can effectively do to possibly reduce the population growth, that we can actually do something with it. But of course, we would not like to see measures being taken, as has been taken in some other, highly developed nations, where the one-child policy was active for a while or so. I'm not entirely sure that this would be a clever political step for Namibia. It is better, I believe, that people would have the freedom to choose in terms of, how many kids they have, and it is for all of us to decide on how many, kids we want to have and how we would like to see their growth happen. So, if you are still in the childbearing age or in the child-making age, do enjoy it, but do also, keep in mind that it has repercussions not only for the next 20 years in terms of you providing for these children, but in terms for the country's economy to absorb all these additional people.
If I may add, Detlef, indeed, this is a very important aspect, but it might go beyond also this topic, food, electricity, and water. Nexus. Of course, knowing that there's an increase of population of 3%, and knowing that the economic development will not have such a growth. We are talking about demographic dividend. No? So this is the headline. And I do see a combination or a relationship with poverty. We know in countries where there is a huge number of people living in poverty, also let's say the growth of population is extremely big. Because why? The social system is lacking. We may also touch this one. Now, why are people still having, or families still having so many kids? It's also a matter of the social system. And that's why development and job creation is so important, knowing also, being aware that there was development taking place in nations where there's an industrialization. Also, this aspect of increasing population is somehow more under control than in countries where poverty is still around and still dominating the nation. No? So, but thank you very much. I think this is a very important aspect, especially in talking about economy, I mean, just mathematically, how big must be the percentage of growth in order to be over the percentage of increase of the population? If you have an increase of 3%, we might need 4 or 5% economic growth, which is simply unrealistic. Yeah, maybe with all, I don't know, could be, but so of course this is something we have always to look at. So thank you for mentioning that.
Good afternoon. My name is Gerard Vries. I'm the Deputy Executive Lifelong Learning Arts and Culture here at the Ministry. So I see these numbers every year and how it's escalating and how the infrastructure doesn't cope and all these things. But something that irritates me is those clever guys that messed up the system in the beginning. And they are all of a sudden now experts with too much to say. And that typically worries me, because the rectification of the injustices of the past is now causing a rut within which we are sitting and must rectify with a very steep population growth and incline. Now, what I was hoping to hear also is comments relating to the homegrown school feeding scheme as part of your food production, where communities are growing food in their backyards and things like that. And then in the food basket, the poultry production in the country. You would be surprised at how many people are having chicken coops in the backyard all over the northern regions, and that is also part of the food basket that is consumed by the majority of people. Most people don't eat meat because it's simply too expensive and not so readily available. And then something that probably I would have loved to hear is how we will go about clarifying the implications to the environment of the green hydrogen that everybody is so euphoric about. I have in my house a person that is also doing food economics, agronomy, all of that stuff. And he keeps on saying to me, I don't hear about what the impact will be eventually to our environment that we are inheriting when you guys with the snowy heads are gone and we sit with the baked potatoes. So that dynamic is probably prudent also, and I would love to hear what you said in the book. I'm not yet at the digital story of reading from a computer on a book or a Kindle. I prefer an old book. I can write there, I pack it away, I come back later. So I would like 2 copies when I leave so that I give one to the ED and so on. Okay, so thank you for what you've been able to write. I'm curious to read. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vries. Over to the authors.
Yeah, maybe on food production and poverty reduction. I tend to believe that the majority of Namibians have not access to 3 decent meals per day. I tend to believe that. I've seen it in many parts, outside of Windhoek, of course, in rural areas and with communities who are really living in poverty. And we are aware of the figures. They've been mentioned earlier, 700,000. And we have elaborated about that in the book. I don't want to talk too much about it, otherwise you would not get 2 copies. It would be too boring probably then. But the economic figures speak for themselves as well. The food prices go up, everything goes up. And just the fuel recently, you can be sure that the food will go up again. A stable food of which most of us rely. School gardens, I've seen them and I see them everywhere. There are schools countrywide who engage in agriculture, but I would have hoped that more could be done here. It's not enough. We still have, and you come from the education sector, you said, we still have kids with no decent classrooms and being taught under the tree in miserable conditions. And that's not acceptable. We have the resources, we just have to think how to prioritize and direct them correctly. I mentioned it. It's not necessary. Our kids have to have a chance, a fair chance, and a lot of them don't have it. I hope that gives you some idea. We can't touch on everything. We didn't touch so much on the education sector because I think every kid deserves a decent education from pre-primary, and it's important that we start early enough. But that's not the case everywhere, sadly enough. Maybe to you on the green hydrogen.
Thank you, Mr. Fries. I really appreciate your comments, and I am fully cognizant of the difficult path that we as Namibians share. And from my perspective, it is important to realize that none of us Namibians have really chosen our past, but we have the power to choose our future. And I think it is about choosing the future we want. And so the Water, Energy, Food Nexus book is not comprehensive in all futures that we may have, but it is hopefully giving a little bit of inspiration to those that have the power to shape the future, to make it possible for people to be taken out of the misery, to have, out of the hungry stomach syndrome. And it is important that we are, joining hands in building this common future, irrespective of how difficult the past is or was. And I think the difficulties are well acknowledged. I believe that it is important to also focus together on what we can build in this country. And this is often, especially in these hyped up scenarios of where the country can be, this is often forgotten, that we need to first establish a foundation and a basis before we become the hub of the world for commodities or so. On the green hydrogen topic, I would prefer not to say a lot because there is quite a lot in the book on green hydrogen, the value chains in green hydrogen for your pleasure to read. I would think that there are opportunities for Namibia, but I'm also concerned that these opportunities require that we prioritize a budget to make it happen. And what I'm really scared about as a common Namibian is that at the end, especially for the mega projects that we hear about, that the mega projects may end up being funded by the Namibian taxpayer, or a part is funded by the Namibian taxpayer. And these projects are mainly for export. And that is a primal fear that haunts me at night when I think, should my daughter, and we only have, my wife and myself only have one child, so the one-child policy applies in our family. You have two. That's so my hope would be that we steer clear of growing a debt burden for future generations to then have to service, because we already have debts in terms of not having sufficient education, not having the infrastructure for water, energy, and food, not having the commodities as are freely available in industrialized countries. So let me not be critical at all about the green hydrogen developments, because I think there are certainly opportunities, but a tad of realism is sometimes important. And colorful songbirds are not always the best messengers of the future. They may sound very nice, but they are also disappearing very quickly when the winds change. And so I would rather say, let's stick to what Namibia has and what we can do with it to and for the development of Namibia. And this is a very political statement now, so as a physicist I feel that I'm somewhat drawn out of my compass here, but I hope you will excuse me if I've been too personal on this one. Thank you for your indulgence.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Basil Otto from Amazing Kids Private School and Academy, and I'm the outgoing junior councillor of City of Windhoek. The topic about sustainable development, which is meeting the needs of people without compromising the future generation to meet their needs. My question is, let's say there is still a problem of food and water in the future. Will the strategy spoken about today and in the book help them improve their situation in the future, or will it only be applicable for now? The strategies, will they only be applicable for now, the present? That's just my question. Thank you.
So would you like Dr. Schneider to respond, or myself? Both. Martin, would you like? Or
Whether it applies for now or for the future?
The strategies will still be applicable for the future in case the future generation is still facing a problem of food and water.
I think they would apply for the future generation. They would apply for the future generation.
Yep.
What I'm reluctant, I don't want to reveal the content of the book now, because otherwise you won't read it anymore. So I would perhaps encourage you to take a hard copy, because some of you indicated that they don't want the electronic version. Yes. I agree with the gentleman there. I like to have a book in the hand, you know, and read it. But maybe you want to add something.
yes, I think we have tried to steer clear of addressing today's problems only. In other words, you know, we do not and have not written the book in response to the looming drought today, in response to the food crisis, you know, in certain areas in Namibia today. But we have tried to sketch a broader framework of creating a secure environment where energy, water, and food can be available to everybody in Namibia. And so this will apply both today and in future. Now, hopefully, some of the concerns we are raising today will be addressed in the next few years, hopefully. But I would still think that gauging where we have been, you know, 34 years ago and where we are today, that we will probably in the next 10, 20 years not solve all problems for Namibia. You know, I'm not that blue-eyed, even though I do have blue eyes. But I'm not that blue-eyed to believe that we can solve every problem today and in 20 years we can say, nothing to do. We've solved it all. But so I think the book tries to give a guideline on how we can strengthen and create a sustainable framework for the supply of water, for the supply of energy, and for the supply of future for today's generation and those coming in our footsteps behind us. Thank you for your question.
Thanks. You did indicate that Namibia export much of its I'm Samamo, comrade from the university. But to be more precise, the law faculty. Now, you did indicate that Namibia export much of its electricity. Now, you also did indicate that most of the rivers in Namibia are ephemeral. And you just indicated also that the green hydrogen will be mainly for export. Now, how does Namibia then produce its own electricity?
So, absolutely great question. Thank you very much for your question. So let me first say what I or repeat what I said, but in one sentence only. Because of our exports in uranium, we are a net exporter of energy, although we import all our liquid fuels, all the coal that we use, all the liquid petroleum, most of the electricity. And despite all this import and despite this excessive import dependence, because of our production of uranium, yellowcake or calcined uranium, we are a net energy exporter. This is interesting because Namibia could embark on a similar role in future in terms of green hydrogen or green ammonia exports. Because green hydrogen or green ammonia are generated or synthesized because they are energy carriers. And they are energy carriers that can be used both in the chemical industry, in domestic settings, as well as in a variety of other applications. However, clearly for making green hydrogen and making green ammonia with it and synthetic fuels, etc., we need water, and we need copious amounts, large amounts of electricity. And clearly, we do not have the electricity right now. So those who wish to actually produce green hydrogen and green ammonia and synthetic fuels will have to put up power plants dedicated to that purpose. And so it is this where Namibia can, in fact, make a contribution, homegrown contributions such as the initiative by Oldhaven and List and CMB Tech. Oldhaven and List, you will remember, is a Namibian company, and they have partnered with a Belgian company, and they are establishing a green hydrogen plant in Walvis Bay, and they are shaping up to become a ammonia generator at the coastal town of Walvis Bay. So these are homegrown initiatives which I have a lot of hope for because they are, take small steps at a time to then expand what is ultimately a scale, or the ultimate power of green hydrogen and green ammonia is that their production can be scaled up systematically. We do not have to start with a bang, but we can start in steps. However, in contrast to this particular project that I've mentioned, there are also other initiatives being spoken about, specifically the project, the large or mega project south of Lüderitz from Hydrogen Energy. And I'm not, let me just put on, make it very clear, I'm not opposed to the project, but I am skeptical about all the ramifications and implications of mega projects. And that is that if we invite investors into Namibia to invest an amount that has the same order of magnitude than the entire economy, just think about the leverage that such investors have on our economy and on our political system. And I ask myself as a common Namibian, so who do we have in government? And I'm not looking at any political figure in the room here, but who do we have in government that can withstand the temptation of having carrots swung before their heads to suggest that the future will be so great? It is easier to manage multiple separate small projects and have them all develop to a bloom than to manage one mega project, which, if it fails, is catastrophic for Namibia, particularly if Namibian taxpayer money is also invested in those. And there are many other points of skepticism about it, but this is particularly not a session about green hydrogen, and this is not a session about my skepticism, but it is about pointing a way forward, saying, fellow Namibians, we are not energy poor at all. We have these resources. Let's go and do something with it. Ministry of Mines and Energy, let's go and do something with the energy sources that Namibia is blessed with. And so that is something that in 34 years of independence, I, as an independent, have problems to see that we have delivered where we ought to be. And the repercussions are what Mr. Fries has said in terms of not delivering on education, performance indicators, not delivering on food production, not delivering on water production, etc. And so therefore we need to see the development of water, energy, food more as an establishment of the basis for national development, to then be sitting on a common, strong local foundation to build our future. That's the ambition.
Thank you very much, Dr.
And that is in the book.
That is in the book, and I hope this is expressed in a way that is digestible. We as authors have done our very best, but of course...
So can I also have a hard copy from the library?
So I will hand it to you as soon as we have had the words of wisdom from Professor Tupisani.
We have time for 2 more questions. Please keep them very brief, and thereafter we will move on to the closing of our program by Professor Tupisani. Thank you very much. The rest of the comments, please, for our feedback evaluation forums. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Toini Amutenya. I'm actually from the NGO sector, probably youth-led, but also I'm standing here in the capacity from the private sector, especially from the climate finance experts in Namibia. And I must say, I feel very much acknowledged to be here because the water, energy, and food nexus is actually part of Namibia's priority areas under the Green Climate Fund's Country Program, which we are busy drafting. And I would really also appreciate a copy. But I also just wanted to echo and maybe understand if in its capacity, the book also touched on mapping the landscape of Namibia in terms of its productivity, especially when it comes to food, growing food, which crops are viable to which kind of places and landscapes, and also maybe going into details of the water quality. I'm actually echoing this on the basis of projects that we have previously implemented, where we ask communities to propose for their own projects. Grants have been submitted to this or granted to these communities, but we have come to realize that the water quality could not support the idea, especially when it comes to community gardens and backyard gardening. So I just wanted to understand if the book indeed did go into details to harness this kind of information that would be needed. Thank you.
It does. It does, and I mentioned in my statement the example of rice from the Caprivi, where I asked the question, why are we not able to buy it here, although it's been grown up there for 30 years. I've been involved in that project. The problem, we are living in a large country with large distances and markets far away, and the logistics. It's a question of economy of scale. And we are flooded with South African products because although government has initiatives to control the import of certain products, with the aim to allow local production to grow, and that's happening countrywide. And 30 years ago, this was not the case. And we grew over the last 30 years tremendously in food production. Although we're still dependent, we are not self-sufficient. I'm reluctant to say as yet, because that's something, if you want to be 100% self-sufficient, it's difficult. But there are some answers in the book about that as well. And we have taken up certain crops where this is possible and where not. We are, for example, we are exporting onions to Angola from the northern parts of Namibia into Angola, and we are exporting tomatoes from the Karas region into the Northern Cape region, because that's happening on demand. And the tomatoes are going to the Northern Cape. They're not going. They don't find their way from the Orange River, from the Karas region to Windhoek. But that's seasonal. have a look at the book there. We have examples mentioned, and I think it's interesting for various crops.
Thank you. One final question, I think, was first.
Oh, here in front. Dr. Itula.
Hello, my name is Panduleni Itula. Thank you very much, everybody. But I'm extremely cautious because of the circumstances. If I say anything here, I'll definitely be liable. But I've got something that we share together. Born in Windhoek, we share the same water, it seems. And when the water was established in 1968, our population was only 69,000 in Windhoek then. But now we are talking about a population of some 400,000. A sixth of the Namibian population is now in Windhoek. And also when you look at the recent census, there is definitely a lot of urbanization taking place. But that is not going alongside with a proper planning of how we are going to manage this increase of population in the center itself. Now, I don't want to talk about where I've traveled and what I've seen because it's reflecting what you have said. But there is a provision in the Namibian constitution about a right to life. And if water is life, are we going to be talking about a government having an obligation to subsidize water so that it's accessible to everyone? And also, are we talking about a government that needs to subsidize food, especially for the growing children? Because if they say in Afrikaans, die boompie really nog young is, if we've got malnourished children, doesn't matter what we do, if we do not sort them out right at the beginning, from the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and that is critical for the future. And if we want a future for this generation, for Namibia to remain, when we are all silverbacks gone, then we have to pay a lot of attention on what our constitutions say and what our obligations are as adults now for the future of the generations. And thank you very much for this young man, for your statement there. We should think about the independent generation rather than the independent Namibia that we now have. Thank you for that. Not a question, but just a contribution. I'm liable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is the sincere hope that you will enjoy the publication, and if you do find mistakes or if you do find areas that are not yet in sync with reality, let us know. Feedback is always important. Criticism is welcome. I think we must learn to also accept criticism where it is correct in order to become a better and construct a better tomorrow. So please enjoy the book that we have compiled. I wish to thank my co-authors, Dr. Schneider and Piet Heinz, without whom the book would have looked very, very different. And you have indeed managed to stress me a lot, Martin and Piet. And that is exactly how books are written. You need to get out of the comfort sphere and think about new things, and I think my co-authors have well done so in creating these non-comfortable zones to think about and to work and construct the future. Whether it will in fact be translated is hopefully for all of us to do, because we cannot lean back and expect others to do the work. We need to all do our share to make this country a better one than it is today. So that's all that I want to say. Thank you again to Mrs. Russmann and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and of course Claudia. Thank you for your attention, and let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schneider, for granting the last few moments to Professor Dupisani to give the closing and give some closing thoughts on the launch today of the Water Energy Food Nexus. I just want to quickly briefly mention Professor Dupisani is a seasoned professor with the UNAM, and he is a professor of politics, and he is quite renowned to give wonderful concluding remarks in many sectors. So let's just hand over to Professor Dupisani. Thank you. You have the last words, Professor.
Ursula, thank you very, very much. And to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, congratulations on supporting research of this foundational nature. I think it's acknowledged and it's appreciated. Having listened to the authors and to all the critical questions, it is very clear that we can't address this issue if we don't address it at the level of morality and ethics. Because these are equally moral and ethical questions, as much as they are technical questions and scientific questions. They are moral and ethical questions precisely because they bring together in an integrated way the interfaces between human survival, between the quality of life, and not only the quality of humans, but the quality of the environment and the planet at large. So they are ethical questions. To respond to this nexus, one requires an environmental philosophy that goes beyond ecology. Ecology, of course, can be your core discipline, or the disciplines that you represent, physics or whatever it is. They can be your core disciplines, but one needs to go beyond that, precisely because of the mutual constitutive nature of the issues. The fact that if you change one, it runs through sequentially to affect all the others. And what I'd like to do is just to make 4 comments. I'm not discussing the book. That's been done brilliantly and admirably by the authors and by yourselves. I'd like to make 4 comments. The first, I want to bring us back to the notion of the nexus. What is the nexus? And why this nexus poses not only policy challenges, but ethical and moral challenges as well. So that's the first point I want to make. And here I'm going to quote from another author who happens to be a friend of mine, and we work together in an international consortium on food, water, energy, and social protection. The plea for universal basic income grants as an integral component of making this nexus more meaningful in a social sense. So I would like to just read this definition. I'm not going to talk to it. And then I will make 2 other or 3 other short comments which you can ponder about or dismiss immediately. Because as a philosopher, I'm uniquely unqualified to talk about science, uniquely so. But that gives me a very peculiar advantage, because I'm not a scientist. I try to be a thinker. I'm not claiming I am one, but I'm trying to be one. So let me give the definition conceptually, and then I will ask the 3 other questions. Here's the definition. Sorry that I have to wear glasses now at my age of 76. My eyes are no longer strong enough to read without glasses. The Water Energy Food Nexus, or the WEF Nexus for short, is a critical framework for addressing complex, it's not my definition, complex transdisciplinary natural resource and environmental challenges in an integrated, innovative way. It can be defined as, and here I quote directly, the study of the connections between these 3 resource sectors, together with the synergies, the conflicts, and the trade-offs that arise from how they are managed. And I want to emphasize that. To make this nexus meaningful, one has to inevitably do trade-offs, and you have to decide on the optimal strategies, not only the broad policy, but the actual strategies that you would require to balance these issues in a meaningful way. And that, I think, is important. So for Namibia, the question is, do we have an environmental philosophy that goes beyond humans to include non-human species and even organic and unorganic species? Do we have that? And the answer I will venture to provide is we don't have the philosophy. We have policies, we have interventions, but we lack the moral philosophy. And the moral philosophy for this nexus is the moral imagination. And the moral imagination runs on the emphatic imagination. Thinking yourself into the boots and the feet of those who do not have. We do not have in Namibia, we do not have that imagination, that emphatic imagination, having empathy not only for humans, but for our planet and for our systems. So what should we do, if you think about it? What should we do? Apart from policy, research, of course it should be research-led, quite clearly. But what should we do? We should create a moral community. Namibia should become a moral community. That's, after all, what education is. That was the famous definition of Cardinal Newman of what a university is. It's a moral community. Do we have that? And with that, I want to leave you and applaud the work that has been done here and the foundation, the elemental work that you've done, the status report, as you very modestly said. I think it goes beyond the status report, but this is what we all have to do. We need to build the Namibian moral community. We need to think ethically and morally as much as we need to think scientifically and in research terms about these issues, because they are ethical and moral questions. We have to develop this empathy for those who do not have. And it doesn't matter whether we impact on the current generation or the future generation. The essence of the moral community is that we have an ethic of care for the environment, for ourselves, for species other than human ones. And that's where we need to go. And that is the challenge for the world. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dubisani, for these final concluding remarks. And I do hope that the audience enjoyed the launch today and that you have some lessons and some thoughts to take with you. And may this also be an opportunity for you to network outside and forge new relationships and innovatively take Namibian food, water and energy security forward. Thank you very much also to our director for the wonderful remarks. And I hope we meet again soon. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the weekend. Thank you.